Since we are showcasing, I would like to showcase my general. You know, it's such an honor to stand here before everybody in front of Major General de Villiers. She is actually the person who recruited me into the Air Force. I don't know if you still remember, in 2004, she brought me into the Denell Foundation training, coming through that foundation training to the military. She was one of the people in the panel who interviewed me to join the Air Force to be an air traffic controller. At that time, I had no clue what air traffic control was. I came from Mount Frey, you know, not knowing anything about airspace or aviation. And then I sat there, I was so intimidated because I see these gold ranks sitting there, colonels and some few majors were them. And Colonel, my apologies, back then she was a colonel, Major General de Villiers, she was a colonel. And then she was sitting there and looking at me with a smile, and they were asking me questions. After some time, she just took a book, she had a notebook, she closed it, and she looked at the pen and said, I have my person. And she says, Lindy, you're gonna be one day be the best air traffic controller. She says, guys, this interview is done. I don't know if the general remembers that. And to cut the long story short, I joined, I came in, I didn't know what air traffic control was about. Then I went to Air Force Command and Control School in Woodspruit for my initial training, done the course there. When I got there, she was the officer commanding of the school, finished, was transferred to Langaban to do my initial validation. When I qualified, she flew to Langaban. And then she said to me, Lindy, next you must become the senior air traffic controller, go do the approach course. So today, as part of showcasing, this is the product of Major General de Villiers. Thank you, ma'am. Thank you, ma'am, so much for believing in me. I'm actually emotional about it. She stood by me throughout my career. There's so much that I can tell. But with that being said, I would like to introduce our moderator for today. It's Advocate Lulu. We all know her. She's the main organizer for this conference. Thank you, ma'am. Will you please step forward? May we please just appreciate the advocate.
Thank you so much, Major Mwenze. Welcome back again, distinguished guests from the lunch. We have agreed that we are going to punish you all for not coming back at 3:05, and I will announce your punishment at the end of the session. But of course, let me first acknowledge the presence of Major General de Villiers from the South African Air Force. We are truly honored to have you as part of our panel this afternoon. I hope that it will send a strong message in terms of indicating the importance of the laws, frameworks, and policies, especially in strengthening our, legal environment in South Africa as well. So welcome, Major General. I would also like to acknowledge the presence of Mr. Ernest Achiapong, that I'm going to introduce when we start, and also welcome the rest of the members of our panel this afternoon. Thank you so much, colleagues. So this afternoon, as indicated, is a showcasing session. We will be focusing on the status of some of the legal frameworks, the programs, initiatives that are already available in South Africa that are supporting us in terms of our coordination, our planning, as well as the regulations that we provide for the industry. We have a bit of some change on the program. Our speaker number 2 is not available, so at least we have one speaker less, but fortunately we had a replacement for that session as well. So without wasting any time, let me first, of course, introduce our first speaker, Mr. Ernest Achiapong. who is the Capacity Development Coordinator at the International Group on Earth Observations that is based in Switzerland. He also leads the development of the National Coordination Mechanism Framework, supporting GEO-member countries, especially member countries like South Africa, because we've been working quite closely as NEOS, as a national GEO mechanism in South Africa, to promote Earth observation for decision-making. His presentation is going to focus on national coordination mechanisms. Mr. Achiampong, you have the floor. Thank you so much for being here. We appreciate you coming all the way from Switzerland. So let's give him a round of applause again.
Thank you very much, Advocate Lulu. All protocols observed. Major General, thank you very much. It's a pleasure meeting you. It's a pleasure meeting everybody here today. When I heard that there was going to be a National Space Conference in South Africa, I couldn't sit on my desk in Geneva for this to happen behind me. So I told my bosses that, look, whatever you do, please, I'm going to leave you for the next 1 week. If you would like, fire me. And they said, we can't fire you, so you just go. Because South Africa is doing an amazing job out there, and it is an opportunity for us to learn from South Africa, and also for the benefit of other African countries. So I'm here to also experience and learn and take notes and document what has happened here to the rest of Africa and to the rest of the world. My name is Ernest Echampo. I come from Ghana, and I schooled in Stellenbosch. That's where I did my PhD, Stellenbosch University. So I'm some way, somehow, a bit of a South African. So, yeah, so today I'm going to share with us something that I've been documenting over the past 1 year, which is within the frame of National Coordination Mechanism. And South Africa is showcased as one of the key examples that we are aiming to propagate when it comes to how institutions at the national level coordinate to advance Earth observation use for decision making. And it also applies here as we see so far. So briefly, let me tell you about the Group on Earth Observations, GEO. It is an intergovernmental partnership of countries and participating organizations that are promoting the use of Earth observation data, tools, and services to advance decision-making, to address issues such as sustainable development goals, disaster risk management, climate change, and urban resilience. So at a global level, we are addressing the global conventions such as the SDGs, as I've talked about, climate actions, the Paris Agreement, Sendai Framework, and also the new urban agenda. So we are a membership of countries. I think the CEO of SANSA talked about GEO. We've heard a little bit about GEO from some other presentations. It is a membership of countries, 114 countries. We are spread across the 7 continents, and we have over 130 participating organizations. These are organizations from the private sector, from the public sector, the regional level, and all these organizations are coming together to say that, look, we need to coordinate and collaborate in order to share data for improved decision making. We all saw what COVID-19 did to us, not as a nation, but as a global village, what it did. Had it not been coordination of resources, knowledge sharing, and technologies, we might have not conquered COVID. And so it was important for countries, institutions to come together to figure out how to support themselves. And this is what the Group on Earth Observation is about. So I talked about the focal areas where we are addressing through data access, data collection, to make sure that whatever we are doing, whatever decisions we are making are informed by evidence, are informed by data. So Earth observation data becomes a very critical component. If we go all the way back to Johannesburg 2022, when the Sustainable Development Agenda was hatched, one of the key areas that all these countries agreed on was the use of Earth observation data to drive the agenda. And so GEO was born out of the Johannesburg Accord. Now, GEO is supposed to bridge the gap. We have advanced countries that have data, and we have developing countries that do not. How do you bridge the gap? Especially when you're talking about a global village where issues concerning developing countries are a matter of concern to advanced countries. There is that need for us to look at how we share data among ourselves to support our decisions, to support our development agenda, and to make sure that together we are creating a world that is sustainable for us. And so we encourage countries to open their data, to open softwares, to open standards, and also to open science. These are all critical tools that can help countries that don't have initial data to support their decision making. And so as we continue to deliberate on how to share data across the globe, we also think about what can happen at national level. And that is how we conceptualize what we call the National Coordination Mechanism. It is supposed to be a structure that allows institutions at the national level, local level, to coordinate and collaborate in terms of data sharing, in terms of developing projects, in terms of making sure that they come together to identify their own needs. At the GEO Secretariat, we've been pushing this agenda for countries to embrace, because it is through this that institutions in countries can know what they are doing. A lot of times we've had issues with countries, institutions that are doing work in silos, and this has affected the way we can optimize our impact. So, one of the key areas by which we do this is the establishment of national GEOs. We have the international GEO, but we also encourage countries to form their own GEO. And so here in South Africa, I believe we have the SA GEO, and then the Secretariat is at the NEOS, where they collaborate and make sure that data are being shared, knowledge are being generated. And then also we've seen it manifest in this international national space conference that we have. I believe that a lot of people did not know about some of these private sector initiatives that are being carried on until you came here. And so these are all very important ways of making sure that we are all up to date and we know what is happening in our country. So for us, we believe that a national coordination mechanism for Earth observation help reduce duplication of projects and initiatives. It also helps harmonize data and bring coherency. It also helps us facilitate a fit-for-purpose data and services. But at the same time, it also allows us to make sure we co-own, we co-develop what initiatives we have. And exactly one thing that is important is how we leverage our existing capacities to optimize decision-making, to optimize initiative, to make sure that we are having impact across the country. One of the key things that came out of our discussion with a lot of countries is how they maximize their return on investment. And so if you mobilize your resources together, you are able to affect more in terms of decision-making. And so we have been collecting best practices and good practices from a lot of countries that have supported their institutions come together through a coordinated effort for Earth observation. And so we have Canada, which is promoting private sector participation. We have China, which has also shared experiences with us. We have Japan, and of course, we have our dear South Africa, which is also putting in a lot as far as Africa is concerned. You are making us proud, and we appreciate that. The United Kingdom is also supporting the effort through their national GEO and also the United States. We have DRC here to learn from South Africa. we are also hoping that other countries will learn from the footsteps of South Africa to also advance their cause when it comes to space and Earth observation initiatives. We also have Kenya, Ghana, Nigeria, Senegal, Colombia, Armenia, who are learning the good experiences and best practices from these countries I've mentioned to advance their own national cause. So you see on my left, which is to your right, some of the key examples that these countries have shared with us, and we are also advocating and sharing with other countries that are of interest to the community. So at the Secretariat, we have some resources that we help countries understand the relevance of Earth observation to decision making. And so we have a work program which is made up of over 48 activities where data services are developed. We have Digital Earth Africa, which is one of the key initiatives. They have their stand at the exhibition stand. Please visit them. They have been producing services that are advancing water resource management, coastal monitoring, and a whole lot of other services that are helping solve real problems. We also have several several services that are being developed through other initiatives under the work program that we help countries tap into these resources. At the same time, we have working groups that countries can tap into, share their knowledge, receive knowledge from other aspects to advance their courses. And then we have the regional GEO, which is the AfriGEO. I believe some of us have heard about it. There is a conference coming on in Namibia, and we are hoping that a lot of countries people can join the program. We also have the Geo Knowledge Hub, which is a depository where we put all the data, tools, and services for everybody to have access to. Of course, we've also developed data management and sharing principles which guide countries when it comes to data sharing. And what we've also been doing is to encourage countries to understand what it means to share, to open access, to develop what they do, to allow private sector engagement. And so we have, through several events, advocated for these kind of effort. The picture on my left is one of these events we had in Ghana where we had all these countries come together to share the knowledge they have, to share the experiences they have. So, having experienced all these national GEOs, which is the national coordination framework that we've developed, we have up to about 5 key observations that were made. The first one is how national GEOs are able to provide policy recommendations based on latest scientific knowledge and EO data and services. How national GEOs are able to enable countries' representation and consistent messaging to GEO. So for instance, if you have a country that is well organized, you have a single voice, and you are able to channel your voice through all the way to the global level. We also have countries tell us that through their association with the national GEO, they've been able to improve cost effectiveness and efficiency in collaborative project development, and also when it comes to funding. Then the last 2 talks about how they've been very active because they are able to nominate, identify the aspects in their countries, nominate them to the global level, and so their members are able to contribute effectively to activities at the global level. And then the last one is how countries are able to define their own initiatives and support other countries through their effort, through the work program activities that I talked about. And so these are all key advantages and benefit areas that we can tap in when you are part of the GEO community. Lastly, let me invite all of us to the GEO Week and Ministerial Summit, which is being hosted by South Africa in Cape Town from November 6th to 10th. This is an opportunity to meet all the global players on the same platform to share, to experience, and to learn when it comes to promoting Earth observations for decision-making across the globe. On this note, let me thank all of us for your attention. I believe that after here, we will have time to chat if there are any questions. Thank you very much once again.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you very much, Dr. Achiampong, for giving us an overview, especially for national coordination and regional coordination and available knowledge resources. For me, I'm always stuck there because we want to tap into those resources, and that's the reason that we are here, especially because these are the resources that are available for us to be able to access the information and the data, and for us to share our information and data as well. And of course, thank you for confirming that we are on the right track. As we can see that we are one of the best practice examples to showcase, especially for Africa. So thank you so much for coming and being with us. Let me move to our next speaker on the list, which is, I would like to introduce Major General de Villiers, who is the Chief Director, Air Policies and Plans within the South African Air Force. I've also learned that Major de Villiers has already attended the United Nations Committee on the Peaceful Uses of Outer Space just this year. So we are really excited with the interest that the South African Air Force is taking in getting involved in some of these discussions. So Major de Villiers, the floor is yours. Thank you. Let's welcome.
Thank you very much. So let me start off with something very simple. My grandmother went to visit her granddaughter. Not me, okay? She visited another granddaughter. This granddaughter just came back from honeymoon. So when Granny knocks on the daughter opens the door, and there the daughter is standing in her birthday suit, as pure and pristine as God created her. And Granny looked at her and she said, "My girl, where's your dress?" She says, "Granny, this is the dress of love. You must see my husband's eyes when he sees this dress." So Granny was thinking about this. That evening, my grandfather gets home. He opens the door and there's Granny. And grandfather asks her, "Mama, where's your dress?" And she says, "Hubby, this is the dress of love." He says, "Eish, Mama, next time you need to iron it before you put it on." What works for one doesn't necessarily work for everybody. So on that note, I need to inform you of a process that we in the military is busy with, and that is something that we call the Military Aerospace Authority. Because we've realized that the military needs, in terms of regulating and in terms of controlling what we are doing, are different to the civilian and the commercial world. So initially, this started off as a military aviation authority, and we were focusing purely on aviation. And then we had to move into the further world beyond the atmospheric flight to look at outer space. And therefore, we've changed this then into the Military Aerospace Authority. So I'm going to be looking just a little bit in terms of our background. What is our focus? What are the processes that we are currently busy with? And then finally, the critical one for us is the timeline to see how we are progressing and where we are working towards. So in terms of the background, you need to understand that there was no provision made for military aviation in terms of regulations. This morning we listened to Mr. Brian Dean, who said that in space, the regulatory framework is extremely complex. So it is complex, and we're not trying to complicate it even more by adding the military aspect to it. In fact, what we are trying to do is to see, is there a way that we can streamline the military aspect of the whole aviation and aerospace sector. But at the moment, there's no provision for that. You have on the one side, you have the International Civil Aviation Organization. They've got all their recommended practices and standards that they apply, and it's an international recognition, but this is simply focusing on civil and commercial flight. The only regulation, if you can call it, is Article 3. Am I right? I keep on, always want to say 30 for some reason, but it's 3. It's Article 3 that states that all that we from the military side have to do is to just have due diligence for the people that are not wearing the uniform. That's all we have to do. And obviously, in a certain time, it could have worked, but we've realized that it doesn't work for us anymore. So the International Civil Aviation Organization is not our answer. It's like the little dress of granny. It's not going to work for us. So ICAO has, in South Africa, the South African Civil Aviation Authority, which is the instrument through which ICAO is applying their standards and their recommended practices. So the Civil Aviation Authority then go and they then promulgate civil aviation regulations. But once again, not applicable to the military. These are the standards of certification for aircraft, for aircrew, all of that, well dealt with, but not for the military. Then, this interesting monster that I attended this year in Austria, and what an opportunity to be able to see what is happening there. And this is now then on the conference for the peaceful use of outer space. So at the United Nations level, now we see that there's a body that is addressing space. So on the one side, we've got a body addressing aviation, there we've got a body addressing space. And the instrument that that body is applying, for example, in South Africa, is obviously through entities like SANSA, where they are looking at the South African space programs. But once again, whatever is being done there is done from a civil and a commercial aspect. Now, I need to clarify this. When we attended the conference there in Austria, and you listen to what is being said there, before we go there, we were told not to even take our uniform with us. We were told to be in civilians because, remember, space is now not for the military. And what we need to understand is that when we talk about the peaceful use of space, and the advocate said it so nicely for me today as well, when we talk about the peaceful use of space, it does not mean that there's not supposed to be military. So peaceful use of space does not mean demilitarized space. And that just gave me a confirmation that we are on the right track in terms of the military, is to look at if we want to utilize outer space, how do we then do that? So we've got ICAO, we've got Civil Aviation Authority to talk to aviation. We've got COPUS, we've got the United Nations, we've got all those treaties with all the associated acts and everything, and we've got SANSA that will look after space. And in the middle of all of this, we've got the Defence Force, and we have to figure out where do we fit in? What do we do, and how do we get to where we need to go? So when the Chief of the Defence Force decided that the Defence Force is going to go to space, we were already busy with what we called the Military Aviation Authority. And the initial focus of this Military Aviation Authority to establish this was similar to the South African Civil Aviation Authority, is to look at atmospheric flight. So we were busy drafting military aviation regulations for atmospheric flight in the military environment. And in addition to that, then we started to expand to look then at our communications, navigation, surveillance concepts, and all of that restricted to the atmospheric environment. But then we realized that we need to move beyond that. And this year, when we started working on this, we started moving from an aviation authority into a military aerospace authority, where we combine then our aviation regulatory framework together with the aerospace regulatory framework, and we establish this. So this will be then focused on, obviously, the first thing, space flight. Now, everybody says you cannot even keep a Gripen in the air. How are you going to keep a spacecraft? Okay, all I can say to that is live long and prosper, and we'll take it from there. All right, so yeah, there's at least somebody who loves Star Trek, yes. But space flight is a reality. Somebody once asked me, and here's Major General Lance Matabula. He is, I'm going to call him the father of space flight for us at the moment in the Defence Force. It is his baby that he has to make grow. But somebody asked me one day, really, they asked the question, you don't even have money to fly Gripens, how are you going to fly spacecraft? And my answer to him was, if we do not start dreaming about flying spacecraft now, we're never going to achieve it. In fact, we should have started dreaming about that when Captain Kirk got into the Enterprise the first time. So we are already behind the curve. And therefore, our focus from the Military Aerospace Authority is on spaceflight. It's on satellites, it's on everything that can orbit, that can be out there, and that can assist us and enhance what we need to keep this country safe and to protect this country at all times. Another domain that we are looking at from the Military Aerospace Authority point of view is the cyberspace. To look at the cyber domain, to look at data integrity and how that will influence us. Obviously, you need to understand that from a military point of view, these smartwatches is one of our worst enemies. So we have to look at how do we use space to make sure that we are protected in terms of the cyber domain. In addition, we're also looking at communications. We are so dependent on space communication, satellite networking, satellite navigation. All of these are critical issues, but from a military point of view, I cannot just plug and play into a commercial system. There are certain regulations that need to apply, certain standards that need to apply, and this is what we will be looking at, is to say what will be those standards from a military point of view. And at this stage, I just need to say that for the defense aerospace industry in South Africa, it is so critical for us to get this MAA up and running. Because up until now, so much of our country's money is going overseas because of our dependence on original equipment manufacturers. If we can get our own aerospace certified and our aerospace industry certified and registered, acceptable norms for the military, that money doesn't have to leave South Africa. It will stay in South Africa and our own defense industry will grow. And that is why the next focus point for us then is the defense aerospace industry in South Africa. Not just the aviation industry, the whole aerospace industry. And with that, I've made so many notes on my laptop of every single organization that was talking here today, because I did not know exactly how big is this aerospace environment of us. And so there's going to be lots of collaboration taking place. So we decided that we will follow a blended approach, and this is something that is really important for me. So the first thing, and this is what we are doing this year, is the South African Air Force. We've got a small group of people, and we sit in our little small office where we work through what we call the discussion document, which is similar to a green paper in the legislative process. So this year we are focusing on finalizing and drafting this green paper. But while we are drafting this green paper, the idea is to already roll out internal in the Air Force the Military Aerospace Authority. What is important to remember is that the instruction we received from the minister was this must be an independent entity similar to the Civil Aviation Authority as an independent entity. We cannot just go independent from day one. So what we've decided to do, and we got approval for that, is to run this parallel process. We're going to start this MAA in the Air Force, where we will make all our mistakes, and those mistakes will be restricted to the Air Force. So what happens in Vegas stays in Vegas, and what happens in the Air Force will then stay in the Air Force. We will make our mistakes, we will learn from our mistakes. We will contact the wrong people, we will contact the right people. We're going to be in a growing process, but while we are growing, at the same time, the discussion document for national legislation is being developed. So that as we learn, we can already adjust and fix what is in the discussion document, so that we don't end up with an act being promulgated and then we do not have an agency that can run it. So this is the purpose of the blended approach. So the first phase of this approach is internal to the Air Force while we are working on the discussion document. The next phase then is to expand, not just from the Air Force then, but to also then include the whole Department of Defense and all partners of the Department of Defense. While at that stage, we convert this discussion document then into a national policy on military aerospace authorities. From there, we will then go into South Africa to say, okay, now that we've understood how this MAA will work, now that we know how to operate it inside the Air Force, now that we know how to do it with all the military, then we're going to expand into South Africa. That is when we start involving the defense aerospace industry to say, okay, let us get, from the day one, you are part of our partners, but then to say, let us see which of you want to be registered under the military as well as a provider, a defense aerospace industry provider. Once you are registered, it will make it so much easier for us if we have to go into projects to understand who are our aerospace partners and who do we partner up with and what are the standards that they are applying. Everybody will know exactly. You will know what we expect from you, and we know what we can expect from you. From there, that is then the ultimate, is after we've done this, we've learned on all our lessons, is then to create the South African Military Aerospace Authority with an associated government gazetted act that will give us the full authority to do what we have to do. So the timeline, our timeline is extremely tight. I think I'm very optimistic. When I spoke to the advocate there, she said, yeah, 5 to 7 years is more or less what you're looking at. I'm optimistic. I think we're going to get this thing flying within 4 years. I hope so, because by the time that General Matabula cuts the strip for our first satellite from the military to go back into the air, by that time I want the MAA to be fully functional. And I hope that that will happen before I go on pension. All right, so for now, until January 2024, we are rolling out the MAA in the Air Force. In fact, we are at the point now where in October, we will do a test run on one of our squadrons. We will take the squadron with one of their aircraft types, and we will run through our full process with that, so that if everything is successful and we can tweak a few things, in November we can experimentally start running this. And at the same time, while this is being run, General Matabula is busy with his team for establishing the Space Command section in the Air Force, and we will link up with that so that we do not leave the space part of this behind. So all of these will be intertwined, and hopefully by January 2024, we will be able to say, yes, the Military Aerospace Authority in the Air Force is established. And for this, we're going to rely so much on our aerospace partners, because the aerospace partners need to help us and guide us and help us to stop over-regulating, but also help us to identify where are the critical areas where we have to regulate. Then, having done the discussion document, the idea is that by January 2024, the discussion document can be handed in so that it can be worked through, so that we will end up by the end of 2024 with a military aviation authority that is not just limited to the defense, to the Air Force, but that covers then the whole defense force, but at the same time with a promulgated national policy in terms of military aerospace. That for us is a critical milestone, because if we do not achieve that milestone, we will not be able to establish the MAA in the terms of what we require. From there, the idea is that by the December 2026, we will have established the MAA to the point where we can formally start registering the defense aerospace industry partners as fully certified and registered elements to provide services and products for the defense force per se. Remember, this does not affect any other criteria that you've got, any other accreditation, but this will just make it so much easier from the defense point of view to make use of your services. And then hopefully, if all goes well, by 2027, 2028, we will launch our satellite, and we will be officially the South African Military Aerospace Authority. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Major General de Villiers, for sharing the plans that the Air Force has in terms of establishing the South African Military Aerospace Authority. This is really exciting, to see. I know that there are a number of legal people on the ground. I recognize Advocate Sikula, who is the previous member of the South African Council for Space Affairs and also the chair for the Air Services Licensing Council. I'm sure you are excited to hear about the plans. I also recognize Advocate Icho Gialitzede, who is the previous member of the South African Council for Space Affairs as well as the member of the board for the South African National Space Agency. So I'm sure you can hear that there are plans from the military side to actually consider some of the aspects that I think over the years we've been mentioning that they are. Our next speaker on the list is going to be addressing especially that. Allow me to introduce Ms. Nomfuneko Majaja, who is the Chief Director on Space Affairs from the Department of Trade and Industry and Competition. Ms. Majaja is also the Secretariat, head of the Secretariat for the South African Council for Space Affairs, and also in charge of the National Space Policy for South Africa. Ms. Majaja is going to focus on the Space Industry Framework and Action Plan. I hope including some of the regulatory frameworks so that at least we can still remember how it is. So, Ms. Majaja, you have the floor. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Advocate, for the warm introduction. I would like to acknowledge Major General Matebula. I've been hearing a lot about him since we were in Vienna with Major General de Villiers. And colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. I must concede that in Vienna, though my colleagues from the Air Force were baptized with fire, we had long evenings up to 8 p.m., 10 p.m., and the last day, 11 p.m., but they were released early. During that time, I didn't drill much appropriately next to Major de Villiers to teach him out about the South African Civil Space Authority, South African Council for Space Affairs, but I'm glad today I will be doing that a bit. So, and we have been saying we need to speak, we need to work together, we need to speak, talk, and work together with their military authority. I may share with Major Matebula that during that week we ate a lot of chocolates. More chocolates for a year within 1 week, because we were out of food, but we were kept in the room until very late. Starting with the presentation. Yes, my contents will include the broad mandate of the DTIC, the space legislative framework in the country, the national space policy, as Advocate Makapela has mentioned. And from that national space policy, I will touch on the space industry framework that the Department of Trade and Industry and Competition has been working on recently with the stakeholders. And it's always nice to finish any DTIC presentation with the relevant incentives, support schemes that the DTIC has out there to offer. Colleagues, I think we are aware that the department is charged with a mandate to drive the structural transformation of the economy, the dynamic industrial and the globally competitive economy. And we are doing that through providing a predictable, competitive, equitable, socially responsive enabling environment. So what we are behind is to provide an enabling environment for industry to thrive, for enterprises to thrive, whilst we are attracting investment, local and international, into the country in various sectors of the economy. Now, shifting the gears to space affairs, because we are about space affairs here today. The Department of Trade and Industry is charged with the responsibility to regulate space affairs in the country. Those would be civil space matters through the National Space Affairs Act of 1993. The legislation provides for the establishment of the South African Council for Space Affairs, SACSA. SACSA is to advise the minister on all national space determination issues, on the determination of the national space policy that is to be followed, or that is being followed by all private sector and public sector authorities. People may ask me or themselves now, why is Ms. Majaja still telling us about the Act of 1993 in 2023? It's many decades, and I must learn from my colleague from the Air Force. He has very tight timelines there. There's something I must learn surely from her, because we have been working on revising our legislation maybe since 2012, Advocate. Much later? Yes, but we have been on the route of revising, because we have realized that that legislation has been a bit outdated with the developments in the country. There have been developments as far as the industry is growing, as far as the international world is growing. And this legislation was at the time of, at the dawn of democracy, when we were trying to be more open to all space activities and all other activities that we were involved in here in South Africa. In this regard, a revised legislation has been finalized by the DTIC with DSI and other stakeholders. All stakeholders were consulted through a number of workshops. We have consulted many government structures, all the clusters, the economic clusters, the GCACs, the international clusters, and the document is within the ministry for his consideration for cabinet and public consultation. My colleague has spoken about the monster corpus, which is the international space governance body, which is based in Vienna. This body is having two subcommittees: Scientific and Technical Subcommittee, which sits every year in February. Then it has a legal subcommittee, which sits March, April of every year. Then in March, that's when we all, June, that's when we all attended the plenary that brings together the scientific and the legal side together in one room. That committee is actually growing every year. Every year, there are countries that would like to join the committee, and it's over 200 members that are part of the committee now. The corpus is based on the international treaties. South Africa is part to 4 out of 5 of the treaties. We have ratified the Treaty on the Principles of Governing Activities of Outer Space, including the Moon and its celestial bodies. We have ratified agreement on the rescue of astronauts. We have ratified a convention on the international liability caused by space objects. The liability convention, if Dragonfly is here, they know very well what that means. We danced and did a lot of running around during the time when their license, AgriSat-1, EOSat-1, was launched in December. For 4 months before that, there was a lot of running around such that we make sure that when the license is issued by the council through the minister, there he is, he knows very well. I used to get phone calls at night, early in the morning, back and forth. But that in essence, without wasting much time, it means that government is taking liability for all actions of the actors in the country, which means government must be very much guaranteed and sure of what it is agreeing to, and be able to say, if anything happens, if to the satellite whilst it is launched into outer space, I will take responsibility, I will be liable. And it was for the first time that South Africa licensed a commercial satellite. And that was something Advocate Icho knows very well. So we had to learn and research and ask other countries for a very, very, very long time. We have above the liability convention, part of the convention on the registration of objects launched into outer space, the registration convention, which means that once the satellite is launched into outer space, it must register with the United Nations, which I've alluded to. More on the role of the DTI within the space affairs, I've talked to, I'm going back now, I'm sorry. We're going forward, not backwards. I have explained that we're mandated by the Space Affairs Act. That act also requires that the minister determines the national space policy. And in essence, the national space policy of South Africa was developed and approved in 2008. And that policy is still in existence, waiting for the promulgation of the act. The council is there to register and regulate national space activities through licenses, as I have alluded to earlier on, authorizing all space activities and supervising the entities that are operating in space affairs. I must say that the minister, it is important that I mention that the minister is currently reconstituting the council, but because the term of the council ended in April, and we need to reconstitute the council as soon as possible, as we do not want a regulatory vacuum. So when the council is issuing licenses, it must ensure that all the activities under the license are in compliance with the requirements and the obligations of the state as far as international treaties that I have mentioned in the previous slide. More on the national space policy, which is the framework. The policy's main principle is informed by the overarching role of contributing to the country's economic growth and social development. So you will notice from other principles that they will be flowing from this overarching principle that whatever we're doing in outer space as South Africa, we are doing it to contribute towards economic growth and social development. During these past 2 days, I think you have seen testimony to that. Various presentations here that are using space for socio-economic development. I'll just highlight few principles of the policy. Amongst those is to develop and maintain a robust set of capabilities in the country. Fortunately, we've got indigenous capabilities here, but it's important for the country to maintain and develop those capabilities even further. We need to support national priorities through coordination and cooperative governance, which I think is what NEOS is trying to bring into the fore, where they are bringing all the parties and all the entities, downstream, upstream, academia, scholars, and all in one room. And that is actually even promoting research and development in space, science, and technology. Within these principles, there is a bigger principle that talks directly to the Department of Trade and Industry. There's one thing that I need to maybe emphasize, that when the policy was developed and made available, it was made available for all the entities, for all the sectors to implement it. It is there as a guiding framework of how things to be done. So that means each and every one of us needs to be guided by the policy. Of specific for our department, which I'll be touching on in the few slides to come, is the one of fostering development of the domestic space industry. We want to do that because we want to reach greater levels of self-sufficiency. I think Major General, I'm sorry if I'm not de Villiers, mentioned that we need to have our own capabilities so that we are not dependent on other nations. We see what is happening worldwide. I don't want to emphasize the issue of geopolitics, but if we have our own, then we are not so vulnerable. So in many instances, we need to have our Earth observation satellites. I know the Department of Digital Technologies and Communication has been talking about the SATCOMs. I will talk to it as well. This will also make us to be internationally competitive. And we will actually, at the same time, use applications for domestic commercial capabilities. I will not leave behind cooperation with other nations of the world, as that is important for us going forward, for strategic and mutually beneficial programs. I've just selected few of the principles of the National Space Policy. For anybody who would want to read more on it, you can find it on our website or on the SACSA website. I now need to touch on more practical issues that we have been involved with. And at this moment in time, I would like to invite Dr. Champong to actually urge his institutions in Ghana to actually participate in the Space Law Moot Court that we actually we coordinate here in South Africa. It was started by our advocate here behind. So we coordinate the Manfred Lach Space Law Moot Court every year here in South Africa. It's organized by the International Institute for Space Law, and we have been hosting it with a number of agencies, including SANSA. I hope SANSA will support next year, and the NEOS has been very much supportive. The competition is held at regional levels. 4 regions we have: Africa, Asia, Pacific, Europe, Latin America, and the North. The African rounds have been hosted lately virtually due to the COVID, but because of digital technology, we have been able to bring together everybody. The winner for the competition represents Africa during the International Astronautical Congress, which is held across the world. And this year's Congress will be held in Baku early next October. So if many other African countries that are here can participate, I'm getting a note, it will be appreciated. Nigeria has won, I think, for the second time, University of Calabar. We need to have more other universities. Now, going for the wrap-up, I've mentioned that the National Space Policy required us to develop the Space Industry Development Framework, which we developed with stakeholders, of course, in 2018, and was recently endorsed by our executive authorities. This framework is to provide guidance for the development and advancement of the space industry, to broaden participation within the industry, for inclusive growth. So exactly the theme of the conference, Space for Inclusive Growth. That framework also is mapping out the economic opportunities that are available in South Africa, available in Africa, available within the region, and available within the world. I will touch briefly on the recommendations of the SIDF. I have heard this from other colleagues this morning and yesterday that we need a comprehensive space program, a program that is fully supported, funded, predictable, and continuous for at least 15 years and over for sustainability, because the piecemeal programs don't really hold us together to continue, keep students, keep engineers, keep technicians at work. And it's actually not working if we have piecemeal kind of programs. Another recommendation put up in the framework is the SATCOMS program. The Department of Digital Technologies is currently developing the SATCOMS strategy. The SATCOMS strategy, I think everybody is aware that it will assist us to ensure cybersecurity, reduce costs, extensive coverage will be reached, far-flung rural areas will be reached, the SADC and other countries, and areas that are not reached by terrestrial infrastructure, of course, space infrastructure will help us to bridge the digital divide. Other pillars and recommendations of the policy include the manufacturing build. The industry here this morning spoke to this. I cannot overemphasize it. The Earth observation program with intended SME downstream support. And this we can do through reorganizing ourselves to provide an accessible funding interventions through various programs that we have from our department, other departments, from SANSA and everywhere else. The SIDF further urges us to revise and revive the African partnerships that we have had. The RMC, I think most people know about it. It has been lying idle, and I think it's time. And other regional partnerships, because it's obvious that we cannot do this all by ourselves. Human capacity building is quite key for any program, and it has to be aligned to that sustainability of 15 years I've mentioned. Amongst the recommendations is the infrastructure upgrade. The colleagues at SANSA talked about the AIT facility in Gauteng that needs to be upgraded. There is a great opportunity for us to work on that with speed, such that our industry can actually use this. We hear the Air Force is going to be launching in the next few years. We need to have that in place for ourselves, for Africa, and the world. On the overall, the funding implementation can be envisaged via triple P models using international and domestic investors, However, a view was posed for us to have a coordination unit within the presidency that will also help in syndicating funds, large investments, using the black industrialists, the international supporters, DFIs, our local DFIs, African DFIs can come true at that level. On the practical level, and in closing, the future for us is to establish task teams. We will implore on all of you to help us with these task teams that will be actually aligned to all the recommendations that I've alluded to. These are the general incentives. I no longer have much time, but we have a stand outside that talks about all these incentives that we have as the DTIC. I am aware that there are already some of the companies that have actually benefited from our incentives, from the MSEP, Manufacturing Competitiveness Enhancement Program, the TRIP Fund, and the SPI, and not that SPI, the Support Program for Industrial Innovation. In conclusion, ladies and gentlemen, the South African arena is based on the international and domestic policy framework, is continuing to revise this framework, and it's important for us to coordinate and implement the key recommendations to move the entire space arena forward. International cooperation is key, especially with the BRICS plus countries. I think we are aware after the BRICS summit, there's an addition of other 5 countries. This, of course, for mutually beneficial programs. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. I've spoken to the reconstitution of the council. Last weekend's newspapers has the advert for that, for nominations. Thank you very much. I'm sorry for taking much of the time. Thank you. I'm sorry.
Thank you. I understand. Thank you so much, Ms. Majaja, for outlining some of the legislations, policies, and frameworks to support industry at the DTI. I hope that the audience now understands that we do have a main body that is charged with the responsibilities to implement some of the international obligations that arise within the treaties, especially for the activities that relates to the launching of space objects into outer space. So you do not develop a space object and then you shoot it into outer space. There are laws and regulations, and the South African Council for Space Affairs is charged with that responsibility to ensure that the objects are licensed, they are registered, and they are supervised as well. Thank you so much. Moving along, we are a bit behind on the program, so I'm going to run through quickly. But firstly, let me acknowledge Major General Matebula once again and welcome you back to our session this afternoon. So our next speaker is Mr. Patrick Foster, who is the professional land surveyor at the National Geospatial Information Branch for the Department of Agriculture, Land Reform and Rural Development. And he will be speaking to us, giving us the status of the TRIGNET program. So I hope most of you know about it, but if you don't know, this is the opportunity for us to learn about it. Mr. Patrick Foster, you have the floor.
Thank you, Edward.
Thank you.
Thank you. How do I use this thing?
So this is forward,
Yeah.
and this is back. Only one,
And
two,
that's this
only one,
pointer.
two, one, two, one, two.
Where's the pointer? Good afternoon. Yeah, we're going off track or tangent. My name is Patrick Forster, and I'm from the Department of Agriculture, Land Reform and Rural Development. The branch that we're in is the National Geomatics Management Services. That's our offices in Cape Town, the United States of Cape Town, that is. As you can see, the university is just to the left of us. We've been around for about 100 years, but we're within the branch NGMS, here it is, sorry, within the Department of Agriculture, Land Reform and Rural Development. I just want to say thank you for inviting us here. We thought we would be fitting into what's happening on the earth. Instead, we're finding everything up in the air. Well, with no air, but up in space. So what I'm trying to do here is just come back and tell you what we do, so that maybe we become useful for you. We have become useful to some components of SANZA in particular, and Hartrow, and Sarah, and so forth. So hopefully you'll find this interesting. So what we are responsible for within government, and we have been doing this under the auspices of the Land Survey Act, is we are responsible for the National Control Survey System throughout the country, the National Aerial Imagery Acquisition Program, which deals with imagery going back to 1926, National Topographic Surveying, digital elevation models, national land cover, and of course ancillary mapping relating to that, and then professional advisory services. When we talk about positioning on the earth here, we talk to the datums we've set up. Land leveling datum gives us height. We're looking at the Hartbeespoort Hook 94 datum, which gives us the horizontal datum. And that then is linked into the International Terrestrial Reference Frame, which is developed by IGN in France, who also developed the Celestial Reference Frame. We're linked into the Hartbeespoort Hook Radio Astronomy Telescope, which is connected via that international system. And I'll just show you a picture of that just now. In addition to that, we have town survey schemes. We have TrigNet that I'm going to talk to, which talks to ITORF 2014. And then the SA geoid, which models the difference between ellipsoids and geoids. If we talk about geoids, we're talking about height above mean sea level. If we're talking about ellipsoids, we're talking about the modeling of the Earth. So that's the dish that we connect into, that we did, and that is the origin of our coordinate system within South Africa. So when we talk about trigonometric beacons, I'm sure you've seen these things on top of mountains and hills and God knows, there's 30,000 of them around about, and we maintain about 10,000. And the reason why we only maintain a third is just to have a fiducial structure to complement or for which we're using TrigNet to augment. We also, that's where they're located throughout the country. Town survey schemes, there's 133 schemes, so when you drive around town, you see like white crosses on the floor. It's not because somebody died there. There's a box in there, and we've got a mark inside there, which we use for positioning, land surveyors, and so on and so forth. And by the way, the trig beacons throughout the country, accuracy about 5 centimeters, and in towns, basically, we're looking about 2 centimeter positional accuracy horizontally. And the next one I'm going to talk to, that's where the town survey schemes are. And then we're talking about benchmarks, which basically follow all our major routes. And they're like studs along the route. We level them at 0.3 millimeters per route kilometer throughout the country. Now, the problem with that, of course, is they're all over the they're all along the routes. They're not all over the country. So what we've developed for users that now use GPS equipment to be able to determine where the geoid is or a height above mean sea level, we've, sorry, I'm going to get to that now, but let me just go there quickly, I'll come back, is a geoid model. Now, geoid model connects the height of something above the sea versus the ellipsoid, and the point of that is, here's a joke about it, is that you can get if water running uphill if you have using ellipsoidal heights, simply because of the geoid creating a bit of a potato-type shape. Anyways, to go backwards, I think I'm going to push the right button now. Yeah. TrigNet is the thing we can talk to, and there's 50-plus operational stations, and we'll get to that now. Geoid model I've discussed. So that's the geoid model for the country. Very necessary requirement for people that are out there surveying or needing position coming from ellipsoidal computation down to above mean sea level. The TrigNet itself was proposed in 1997, approved in 98, and have commenced in 99 with the first installations. And we started with collecting data from GPS satellites, which are 20,000 kilometers up away from us, up in space. And at that time, we only had about 4 satellites in view at any one time. But we were producing post-process data, providing people with that. And basically what you do is you get the data from us, and you calculate it with your data, and you're then able to get down to centimeter levels of accuracy. We went up into an FTP website after that, and then post that we went real-time. Real-time meaning that we were collecting data coming in, and then we're feeding it straight out to you via an N-tripcaster, and then you would be using it while you're walking around what we call real-time kinematic surveying using GPS and GNSS techniques, where you would get down to centimeter levels of accuracy within about 30 kilometers of our base station. Get there too, sorry, lots of information. These are the antennas. Those big domes on the top are just to protect it, but otherwise they are choke ring antennas, just to make sure there's no multipath, but they're just an antenna. Linked to a receiver which collects the data and then ports it back to our office in Mowbray. Now what's happened here is you'll notice where we started off, it was like lots of computers and stuff like that. They stuck the computer inside the receiver, the GNSS receiver. And then after, what we're currently trying to do is, well, what we currently are doing is we're going into a wireless framework, which has taken some time. So we're currently, right now, in the process of replacing our DigiNet or copper lines with wireless technology. And yes, and we maintain the stations ad hoc. If you want to see our network, it is at trignet.coza. And if you want to download the data sets, they're at fdp.trignet.coza. This infrastructure upgrade, of course, has been coming for a very, very long time. And we are so excited to say that it's actually happening. It's taken about, I would say, 5 years. The planning for this, the last 2 years, should have taken about 6 months. But anyways, this is the exciting thing. We've got a net server and a web server, and we've got FNX wireless technology feeding in. Just to give you an idea, the current network at the bottom, which will become 1 megabits per second lines, are currently 64 kilobits per second lines. The 10 megabyte data set, data capability coming in through the microwave currently is 768 kilobits per second. And then the output to the web, which is going to be 20 megabits per second, is currently just under 2 megabits per second. So you can understand my excitement. The N-tripcaster is at 196.15.1322. That's its IP address, so you'd link into it via the internet and then use that to get your accuracy down from generally 5 meters down to about a centimeter or so, depending how far away you are from a base. Okay, so this is their thing, exciting as IT people. But anyway, so this is the network currently. So you'll notice there's VRS things there called VRS. I haven't explained that. Virtual reference stations. So what we do within those areas, which are the metropoles, is we create a homogeneous correction framework within it. So what happens is wherever you start doing your work or surveying, you actually create a data set for where you are virtually. And should you move 5 kilometers from that initial start point, it will restart or reinitialize your start point again, and then you would start surveying. So effectively, you're within 5 meters of your base station. But those are the base stations as we have them through the country. And you'll notice that this is sorry, I should actually go back there. This is very exciting. I was sitting here yesterday, the 29th of August, day before, we had 57 sites, and then, yay, we got back. Krugersdorp yesterday, very exciting. So once the upgrade is now actually happening, and very excited, I must say. And I think it's more a frustration getting it released than anything else. So what we're then going to do after this is that we've got no connectivity to these sites because of copper being lost and so on and so forth. We're going to get that all back going again. And then we've got 3 new sites coming in, so that'll get us up from 58 to 69 stations, yay. And then Going forward, we're also working obviously with SANZA and with Hartebeest Radio Astronomy Observatory, Dr. Botha and Jonathan Ward over here, looking to go forward and have MOUs so we can bring in their data sets rather than just working ourselves, and have a collaborative effort, and then also be able to utilize the data not just for our purposes, which is coming from a survey environment, but looking towards the scientific community, which has been well established over the last 20 years. I'll get to that just now. These are the hard drive sites that we would like to incorporate into our network. I think that's enough. And then as far as international users are concerned, we're looking at the IGS stations. The International GNSS Service uses our data sets. And NASA and CDDIS uses our real-time streaming for computing satellite orbit issues and so on and so forth. The data sets that link up to the control segment within GPS, GNSS, and so on. TrigNet, the JAXA IGS stations, we have 2, but I think that's enough on that. SANZA in particular is using our data to be able to work on the total electron content. I did speak to Dr. Matamba yesterday, and she told me a bit about what they're doing with it. It seems to be also looking to how the effects of the total electron content and storms within the ionosphere affect aviation and so on and so forth, beyond me. But these are exciting things that are coming in addition to what we normally would use the data for. Other issues, for example, we've had examples of people in Russia and China and so on determining the height of, let's say, Stembras Dam, just based on the multipathing of the data sets. We've had some, also, I can't remember exactly who it was, but in the Northwest Province, they could determine what the soil moisture content was just using multipathing techniques. So there's lots of capabilities of us collaborating with other partners in the industry where you get 1 + 1, which equals now not just 3 but 4. This is an example of what was sent to me by Dr. Matamba, and that's talking to the total electron count. But if you want to know more about that, speak to Jonathan. Our contacts, what we also, I said to you, we have all sorts of other stuff such as mapping and aerial imagery and so on and so forth. So please, we've also got a portal with all our data on there. The images, the maps, the data sets are all on there. You can collect it from there as well. And also our product distribution people in. But otherwise, if you just want to get down to the United States of Cape Town, just come visit. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Patrick Foster. It was actually quite interesting to listen to your talk and getting to know more about TrigNet and understanding, getting the information to know that we do have the network of base stations and remote stations that are covering all over South Africa. It was interesting to see that there are some areas as well that are more where the remote stations are concentrated more than others. Of course, I think when we get an opportunity to have more time in the future, I think we will critically look and understand how everybody can also participate in that. Thank you so much for the presentation. Mr. Lucky from the Lucky Mameja from the Non-Proliferation Council. He will be presenting to us. You've heard about all of these authorities today, so from the military authority, from the space authority, which is SACSA, and now we are going to listen to the Non-Proliferation Council of the DTI. And one true fact that people might not know, Lucky and Ms. Majaja, is that both these legislations, both the South African Council for Space Affairs and the Non-Proliferation Council were actually enacted on the same day, in the same year, at the same time. So we really appreciate you being here. So please, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Advocate. All protocol observed. Greetings, colleagues. My name is Lakima Mija. I'm from South African Council for the Non-Proliferation of Weapons of Mass Destruction. I know it's a long name, but I'm from the NPC, the Secretariat of the Council. So I will be doing a presentation on the overview of the Council and the controls. We are going to look at the policy on non-proliferation. I will allude further into legislation framework, as well as the international obligations that the South Africa is part of. I will also look at the dimensions of control, as well as look precisely into what we call missile technology control regime, the control list, and then I'll explain why do we have imports and exports of those items, and also I'll show you the control structure of those items, and then lastly, I'll give you what you call internal compliance program that we made for our industry to comply with. Colleagues, the policy on non-proliferation, if I have to take you back, pre-1994, if you are aware, there was 6 atomic nuclear bombs that were constructed by South Africa, where one, if you detonate it, could just kaboom the whole of the Pretoria city within seconds, and then for 30 years we won't be living in this area. And then after also in the north of Pretoria, there was a laboratory that was developed under what we call Project Coast by Dr. Basson, where they developed biological weapons and then chemical weapons. As such, pre-1994, the South Africa, they took a policy, adopted a policy to say, we are moving from the wrong side of these weapons of mass destruction. They adopted a policy where South Africa wanted to be seen as the major play role within the peaceful use of this technology. That's why we adopted the policy of weapons of mass destruction to do away with it. The policy gave the actions where South Africa, in order to implement that, it became the member to non-aligned movement and also other suppliers groups. So the outcomes of that was that South Africa would use its position to advance other countries that want to use the technology for peaceful purposes. And as such, the policy constituted the formulation of what you call the Non-Proliferation Council that will oversee these other issues of non-proliferation and implement the peaceful use thereof. What we have here is legislative framework, like Advocate said, is the Act 87 of 1993. We call it Non-Proliferation of Weapons of Mass Destruction Act. It provides the establishment of the Non-Proliferation Council. The council is constituted of other state agencies. We have state security agencies, we have defense intelligence, we have Department of Mineral Resources and Energy, we have Department of International Relations, that is DIRCO, and then we also have the colleagues, the adopted members with their specializations, and then we also have the representative of AMD South Africa. It also supported by the Department of Trade and Industries. So we are the Secretariat for the labor issues, we sit in that Secretariat, but we serve the council. So council sit every 6 to 8 weeks. We run the daily activities of the council. So the council has the powers to appoint the inspectors to go into the facility to inspect if the facilities that are registered with the council are still abiding by the non-proliferation law. And it also provides for the registration. If you are in the activity of proliferation or in possession, you have to register with the council. Also, the Act also provides for the control goods, either biological, chemical, and nuclear weapon. It also published other regulations, the Code of Conduct, and then also it caters for offenses and the penalties, as well as we have the confidential agreement with our clients. And it also has the powers to sign other treaties that South Africa can be part of. These are the legislation framework that I'm talking about. In the Act, it says if you are in the activities means you are manufacturing, or you are in possession, or you are importing or exporting, you have to register with the council according to the legislation number 1, which is the secondary legislation. And then we have taken a chemical weapon convention, that one that is prohibiting the use of chemical weapons. We have took that convention as a South African law. We have enacted we published it as a secondary legislation, and then we have a list of chemical items that we have published under the chemical regulations, and we also have what we call missile delivery system control goods. That is where we took all the list of items from the missile technology control regime. We have published them as the secondary legislation. And then we have nuclear dual use. Those are the items that mainly you can use for proliferation purposes. However, some can use it for peaceful use. So we have that nuclear dual use legislation that we do control. And then we have what we call stable isotope separation technology, where you can use to enrich uranium to make a nuclear bomb. However, it has not been proven, but we regulate those kind of technologies. We have also biological control goods, where we regulate those toxic chemical weapons that one may use to destroy the whole nation with them. And then we have chemical compound goods that we have adopted from Australian group that we have just added to our legislation. These are the international obligations that South Africa, through the Council, have been affiliated to. We have Treaty on Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons, where we want the 5 nuclear weapon states to disarm their nuclear weapons, because if we fight the nuclear war, there won't be a winner in that war, because the world will be destroyed. And then we have what you call Nuclear Suppliers Group, where we meet 3 times a year. We discuss the items that can be used in making the weapons of mass destruction. This Nuclear Suppliers Group allude further into the items that are strictly designed to be used in nuclear weapons, and then the ones that are maybe dually used. Like, for example, machine tools. You make the components, you make the valves with them, but one can design or manufacture a component that you can use in a long chain of making the weapon of mass destruction. So we have to control that machine tool. We have biological and toxin weapons that we are affiliated to, which looks at the issues of the biological and then the chemical that could be used as a precursors to make the biological bomb. And then this one is relevant to the space industry, which is Missile Technology Control Regime. This one is where the components of one to end up building a rocket or intercontinental ballistic missile has to have a component in place. So we control cradle to grave, all the components that can be used. We sit in this also the regime where the like-minded states set together to look at the items that can be used to proliferate or to deliver those chemical weapons. And we have Comprehensive Nuclear Test Ban Treaty that Council is part of, that South Africa is part of. It is against the ban, it is against the testing of nuclear weapons. We have wave station, we have radionuclide where we check the signatures. If you detonate the bomb, we can, through the technologies, the international monitoring stations, we can be able to detect that the bomb was detonated here through this regime. And then we also have Wassenaar Arrangement, which is implemented by DCAC, where that committee of ministers sits, NCAC. So this is not implemented by the council, but we have dually used items that fall within us. So that's why we've put it here. As I said, they interrelate. What you see here, part 1 and part 2, is Nuclear Suppliers Group. Part 1 is what we call the trigger list items that are especially designed or prepared to be used in nuclear reactors or that can strictly be used in weapons of mass destruction. Under the Nuclear Suppliers part 2, we have in the items that can be used, mainly are used for safety purposes, peaceful purposes, but however, one with no demand can use for proliferation purposes. So we do control that. And then we also have the Missile Technology Control Regime, where components in here, one can use them to, like, for example, we have the bonding agents. The engineers will tell you that it's used in the propeller so that when it flies out, it doesn't just burn all the fuel. So it can bond all the explosive inside it. And then we have what we call military list of Wassenaar list, and then we have dual use of Wassenaar list. All they are interrelated. What you see as the Australian group, South Africa is not part of it. However, we took those chemicals and then biologicals that we feel are important as scientists that it can be used in making the weapons of mass destruction. We have put them as South African legislation so we can implement them. The area of control, like I said, we control cradle to grave. We have 3 dimensions. We control the activities. The activity, we control the manufacturing. If you have the capability of developing an item that can carry a payload of 500 kilograms that can travel to a distance of more than 300 kilometers, we regard that as a Cat 1 system. You have the capability of producing that, you have to register with the council. You have a capability of building item that can carry a payload of 500 grams but travel at a speed of, at a distance of 100 kilometers, you have to register with the council. We also regulate the trade of those items, and then also the transfers and then transit of them, and then the use and the possession of them. With regard to the goods and technologies, we control the infrastructures, the materials that you may have, the models, the subsystems, and the systems. With regard to the technology, we control them according to the readiness level of that technology. How do we enforce that? We have drafted a policy which is governed by which has the legislation to control that. And then we have the list of the control items that we specifically look at. We don't control everything. We have the list of the items that we look at. And then also we have the control mechanism where you have to apply for a permit, where we have to visit your entity. And then we have a compliance office where we ensure that all the transactions that took place are filed. And then lastly, we have law enforcement and then the border control. We work close to close with SARS, customs. If you want to sneak out an item that is controlled, it's going to dock at the port of entry or a port of exit. The SARS is going to call us 24/7. We have a cell phone that is office centralized. You call us, they detain that item for us, and then I have to shoot at the specification of that item and then release it. That's how we have these controls. And then these are the list of the items that we control under what you call missile technology and control list. We have complete delivery systems. We have complete subsystems. This category 1, to be honest, you won't ship it out of the country. We have to have what we call end-use agreement with that country that we are sending to. We have to have what we call government-to-government assurance. Because if you have this kind of technology, imagine if you can travel more than 300 kilometers with a payload of 500 kilograms, carrying a biological weapons or a nuclear weapons, what's going to happen to that country? So that is why we have to implement that policy that we don't have non-proliferation of weapons of mass destruction. We have propulsions. We have the production structures that you can produce the test benches for that the missiles, and we have control the avionics. We have launch support, the radiation-hardened computers. Those items that you see here, we control them from the technology to the software, to the material, to its tangible item. We do control with this list. And we're not having this list just to control, to stop the trade of items. No, we are in the Department of Trade Industry. Economy growing is #1 priority. We are doing so that you don't get blacklisted or listed under United Nations Security Council, that this organization has proliferated, has sent the items that are used in the war from this country, then they blacklist your country. We're protecting you. We are the non-proliferation. We also protect the interest of our industry. Why do we control the weapons, the exports and the imports? We understand that these goods, they have the potential to be used directly in weapons of mass destruction. When we are sleeping, the missile is moving. When you wake up, the missile is moving. People don't sleep. They are building missiles that can destroy the nations. So we have to be alert 24/7. The production, the supplier, the recipient, we have to ensure. That's why in our committee we have state security intelligence in our committees. And then we also do this to promote the trade, to allow South Africa to gain other technologies, to be seen as the trusted entities, government by our counterparts. This is the control structure. It is under the Minister of Trade and Industrial Competition. We have the council where they sit every 6 to 8 weeks, and then I'm from the Non-Proliferation Secretariat. These are the committees that 7 of us at the office, we serve on. The Control Committee look at the import and exports of those items. Chemical Weapons Working Committee, they are technical people who are looking at the chemical issues. And then Biological Working Committee, they are biological experts who are looking at the committee. And then Nuclear Dual Use Missile Committee, I also sit in that committee. We look at the nuclear and missile dual use items. And these are other CTBT, they are against the testing of the nuclear weapons. We sit in that, and then we have what we call NPRC, Non-Proliferation Review Committee, where we review the legislations, we review even our act. And then we have non-proliferation and SARS. We have memorandum of understanding with SARS where they stop items for us because they are last to see the item as it leaves South Africa and the first to see one as it docks inside South Africa. And then we have project management committees that manages the service level agreement that we have with the two institutions that are technically capable to provide the techniques to go to be the first respondent when there's a chemical leakage or there's a nuclear testing that had occurred. So we have this service level agreement with them. We have formalized the things. We understand that regulation is very complex. That is why we came up with what we call internal compliance program for the industry. The internal compliance program, it's mainly purposed for the industry to can ensure that industry know what South African policy is and then what are the obligations of the council and what are the mechanism or the process of applying a permit and then the control activities that are regulated. As such, we have identified that every industry, independent of the size, it must have the top-level management commitment. It must have the person who is nominated to consult, to communicate with our office on a daily basis, and then it must have the training of what we do, train everybody in the institution yearly or quarterly or every 6 months, so that when one is developing an item, one wants to consult with them, they understand that they need to check with the non-proliferation regulation first. And then they must also have the audits and the reporting in place. And then they must also keep the records of the items that they have transacted on, so that when we come to inspect, everything is in file and then they don't get prosecuted through our act. And then that is at the end of the non-proliferation presentation, and I thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much, Mr. Mameta, for that presentation. As you have heard, ladies and gentlemen, that we do have another authority that is charged with the responsibility to regulate import and export strategic goods and technologies of dual use that could be used in the development of weapons of mass destruction. So it's quite important that we sort of take some of these numbers and some of these websites so that we can get as much information as we can, so that we are not found, in the opposite of the rules and regulations that South Africa have set, especially because some of these rules, most of them, they are complementing one another as well. So, ladies and gentlemen, allow me to call our last speaker of the day, who's actually going to focus on the initiative called the Neo Frontiers, as well as the development of the SciES portal. That is Ms. Asanda Disana Sangoni, who is the acting Managing Director for Earth Observations at the South African National Space Agency. So, Ms. Disana, thank you so much for being here. You have all the 5 minutes to conclude the presentation.
I'm not sure whether to be worried that Sansa is getting, 5 minutes. No, I know, but this will be the shortest, believe me.
Oh, okay.
The shortest presentation here. Elulu, what am I missing?
It's this one. Okay, you pointed down.
Okay, sure. Okay, I'll start off with the Neo Frontiers. It's a new Earth Observation Frontiers program. It is a DSI-funded program. It is a financial support instrument aimed at SMMEs and has an HDI focus. I think we all saw the industry, the handsome white, the industry players there. So we are all about inclusion, really. We are not, we are not shy to say that we'd like everyone included, and the SMME and HDI focus are really, we will not, be modest about that. So that particular program, I know that there have been calls that went out. There were 2 calls that went out. We were supported by the NRF in those, and we are also working with NEOS actually to really implement this program. Calls will go out, I think, September, October. So HDIs, SMMEs, we are really looking forward to your responses there. The next instrument is the SIOS portal. I'm sure this industry has heard about the SIOS portal and are wondering how long does it take to create one. But this one has an implementation date. It will be submitted in November this year. It is really a system, a South African Earth observation system that will coordinate access of all data sets in the country and to form a single system. So we are hopeful that this will really assist the community to have a single point of access to national data sets. So, and we also, then there's an intention that this system will be integrated into the AfriGeo hub as well as the Global Earth Observation System of Systems, which will then allow for opportunities beyond the borders and really speak to internationalization. It will provide a platform, metadata, a platform where users can really also access metadata of all the data sets that are available there. And I'm done. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. You can see everyone is happy about that one. So, no, thank you so much, Ms. Ndisa Nasangoni, for that presentation. I was starting to regret for giving you the whole 5 minutes. Because now when you started talking about the project, I was like, oh, this is the information that everybody wants. Ladies and gentlemen, we have received some of the comments, but we will not take the, because of the time right now, we are not going to be accepting any questions. But from my side, just to wrap up, I would like to really thank my panelists, my speakers today, especially our speakers, Major General de Villiers from the South African Air Force, Mr. Ernest Chiompong, and the rest of the our speakers here nationally for coming forth to share some of this information. Now we're starting to realize that the times that we are setting for these sessions are not enough, but I think we can improve on that going on. So allow me to bring back the MC of the day. Oh, sorry, I didn't see you. I was starting to get worried. Let me hand over, of course, to our MC for today, Major Mwende. Over to you.
Wow, thank you so much once again, ladies and gentlemen. We are concluding the session, the program for today. And as we conclude, I just want to thank all the organizers for this conference. They are doing such a marvelous job. Can we please just appreciate them? Thank you so much. Thank you. And with that being said, to appreciate and show our much appreciation to our speakers, I would like to request Major General Matebula to please step forward to hand over the gifts to our guests as they also step up, please, and come forward. Thank you so much. Ladies and gentlemen, this brings us to the conclusion of today's program as we are kindly requested to proceed to the exhibition area for refreshments and networking until tomorrow. Thank you.